Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to my complete Kazuha guide. Kazuha is an incredibly fun character who can serve many roles as a powerful anemo support. He can amplify your team's elemental damage while also being able to carry your team with his powerful swirls if you do stack elemental mastery on him. He also has very good scalings on his abilities, so there are many ways to build and play him that I'm going to cover in this video. A few important things before we begin. Number one, I've been testing him extensively since he came out on the Asia servers, and Zajev77, my math guy, shout out to him, link in the description, has also helped me test and do the math on a lot of Kazuha builds. That being said, if anything changes in the future or if there's anything I'd like to add, it will be in a pinned comment, so be sure to check that out. On top of that, the main thing I want to say is that Kazuha is a competitive unit with other anemo characters. He has a very strong role in many teams. However, I don't believe he's a must pull, and so I always advocate for pulling for the character if you enjoy him and if you like his playstyle. That being said, I have a pretty clear bias towards agile and smooth characters, which Kazuha is, so I really like him. But he is a great anemo support that can clump enemies without lifting them in the air like Venti does, and being great in Quickswap teams. But anyways, I want to keep this intro short, so in this video we're going to break down how to build Kazuha the best way possible and everything you need to know about him. Before I begin, I want you guys to know that I stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested. Be sure to sub if you enjoy the content because it means a lot, and with that being said, let's get right into it. So first up, we're going to talk about Kazuha's talents and the different ways to play him. For his elemental skill, it's actually a very good ability that can be used in multiple ways. You can either press it or hold it. It'll do a nice amount of anemo damage when you do that, and then after that you can do a plunge attack when you're in midair, and that plunge attack does become anemo damage. The damage you deal from it is converted to anemo damage, which makes it actually worth using. And so the differences between pressing and holding are actually there's a few. First of all, the cooldown is different, so 6 seconds on press and 9 on hold. So if you want to maximize your damage, you're usually spamming the press. However, hold does have many situations where it can be better. For example, against a lot of enemies, hold can be nice because the AoE is bigger, and it's also better to group enemies. Something to keep in mind with his E is that whether you press or hold, you can sort of group the enemies, and with the plunge, it'll do something like that clumps them up and lets you, just deal damage to all of them grouped up. Something to keep in mind is that press and hold can both do it, but hold is usually better at grouping enemies because it has a wider AoE, so it'll hit, more things around you. On top of that, you should know that when you press your skill, it generates 3 particles for you, and when you hold it, it generates a random amount between 3 and 4. On top of that, something pretty cool is that for the tap, you can actually use it midair. So let's say you can jump and then press E and get a plunge a bit higher if you want to, and let's say you're just flying, gliding around or whatever, you can still use your E in the air. Moving on to your elemental burst, this is a very powerful ability despite the cringe name. Other than the initial slice, which does a pretty good amount of damage, it does do additional damage, a damage over time, slicing and swirling another 5 times. On top of just that, it does have this elemental absorption property, which means it can basically infuse with a specific element, dealing additional elemental damage of that type, and proccing your Viridescent Venerer set if you are running it. In terms of the energy cost of this burst, it is 60, which is okay. It's not too bad, but it's not amazing either. And something to keep in mind is that you actually can get particles during its animation. What that means is that something you can and oftentimes should do is you can use your E right before your Q. And then what's going to happen is the particles are going to fly to you during the animation of your burst. And as you guys can see, I'll start my burst with some particles, right? I just got a bunch of particles, which it's a big amount because I was killing some enemies, but basically you do get the particles that are traveling to you during the animation of your burst. So the 3 particles from your E, you will get while your burst is in the animation. I'm going to test it again against just one enemy just to show you, but see, these 3 particles are flying to me. I press my Q, and now I started with that little bit of particles. Now for Kazuha's passive talents, he actually does have some amazing ones. First of all, when your elemental skill contacts another element, like one of the main 4 that you can swirl, it'll absorb the element, and then if you use a plunge attack, when it's still infused before the effect expires, it deals more damage. It's actually an additional 200% attack of the absorbed elemental type as just bonus damage, which is part of your plunge attack damage. His most important talent though, and the best one, is the one you get at your Ascension 4, so past level 60, 60 out of 70. Now this talent is absolutely amazing because it gives elemental damage bonus to your team. Now this is translated poorly or worded poorly, and it doesn't do exactly what it says, so let me specify how this works. First of all, the elemental damage scaling does scale off of your elemental mastery. So as you guys can see, it's 0.04% elemental damage bonus for every point of elemental mastery you have, and it lasts 8 seconds. Now, the mistake in this paragraph is that it says it'll grant your teammates elemental damage bonus to their corresponding element. that is actually not true. And so let me show you what it actually does. If that paragraph was true, it would actually buff every character to their element, right? But that's not what it does. Let's say I swirl Pyro here, and then I look at my passive. All my characters actually gained Pyro damage bonus because I just swirled Pyro. As you can see, Xingqiu gained 5% Pyro damage, Bennett gained 5%, even Venti gained 5%. And to show you guys what I mean, I'm gonna let this expire and show you guys that my Venti's, okay, so the Pyro damage expired. As you can see, my Anemo damage bonus is 61%. And so if this were to buff every element, even if I swirl Pyro here, my Venti should gain a Nemo damage bonus, but that's actually not the case. As you can see, it's still 61.6, and I gained Pyro damage bonus. Now keep in mind, you gain a lot more than 5%. My Kazuha is very low on Elemental Mastery right now. I'm on a pure damage build, but this is just to show you guys that the way it's worded is very weird and actually incorrect. Also, something important to know about Kazuha's burst is that it does actually snapshot. What that means is that if you buff it at the very start, it'll be buffed for the whole duration for all 5 of the bonus hits. All of the slices will factor in Kazuha's stats at the very beginning of the burst. That means that if you use Bennett's burst and then Kazuha's when he's in the field, it will buff the entire burst even if you run out of it or even if Bennett's ult expires. Now for your talent priority, and I know my levels changed because I'm recording this clip on my NA account, but all 3 talents are actually good and pretty close, but I usually recommend leveling your skill first because it has a low cooldown and a high scaling, and most rotations in most teams will allow you to spam your E. That being said, your normal attack is actually pretty similar because leveling this does increase your plunge damage, so leveling your normal attacks can be a similar priority to your E. On top of that, your burst can also be very good to level because it has many different scalings that increase with its level up, and talent priority with Kazuha can actually depend on your rotations and how much energy recharge you have and how many E's you use with every Q. That being said, as a general rule, I recommend leveling your elemental skill first, and then your normal attack and your burst are very similar. Something else you guys should know regarding Swirl in general is that it is a transformative reaction. That means that elemental mastery and more importantly level actually affects your damage quite significantly. So for characters that want to swirl a lot like Kazuha, it can actually be worth leveling him up all the way, whereas for other characters I usually save my resources, keep them like level 80 out of 90. For Kazuha, leveling him up is actually worth it if you have the resources to. On top of that, something else you need to know about Swirl is that it actually deals double damage when you swirl multiple enemies together, so 2 or more enemies. To show you guys what I mean, I'm going to swirl one enemy over here, just this one, all alone. And you can see the swirl there did 4,000 damage. It was the red number. If I were to swirl all of these enemies together right here, you'll see this, it actually did 2 instances of swirl, right? You guys saw the 2 separate numbers, the 4,000 literally twice. I'll do it again. See, it swirled them together. You actually double your damage by swirling enemies that are together or at least more than one enemy. This just means that Swirl is better against multiple enemies, and so it's very good to group up enemies either with Kazuha or by running another Anemo character and comboing their bursts together. Now very quickly, before we get into Kazuha's builds, I do want to specify that there are a few different ways to play him. But effectively, you can either run him as a damage amplifier, giving elemental damage to your whole team, which is especially powerful in an elemental or reaction-based team comp. And you can also run them in a Quickswap team, which I personally use, where you spam your abilities on every character, constantly swapping between them. Now this mainly affects your team comps because the builds for both of them are similar. Elemental Mastery is basically always good on them, but I did want to clarify all of that right now. And with that out of the way, let's talk about how to build Kazuha efficiently, starting with his artifacts. So the way you build him can vary, but overall, the set you're usually looking for is the 4-piece Viridescent Venerer. This gives you 15% Anemo damage bonus, increases your swirl damage by 60%, which is huge notably on swirl builds, and it decreases the resistance of opponents to whatever you swirl by 40%, which is a really good set, but especially for Kazuha, because let's say you swirl Pyro with a Pyro carry, you not only decrease the Pyro resistance of enemies by 40, but you also buff your whole team with Pyro damage bonus as well, so he's a very good user of Viridescent Venerer. And so Viridescent Venerer is the set that I basically always recommend for Kazuha, except I feel like I should mention some other niche sets, just to be very complete in this video. For example, there does exist a Thundering Fury Kazuha comp, which I'll show at the end of the video. 2-piece Wanderers gives you 80 elemental mastery, and in some Quickswap teams where you're building damage and not elemental mastery, Lava Walker or Thunder Soother, if you can maintain the uptime, will give you that 35% damage bonus, which is pretty good. That being said, for most players and overall, I highly recommend the 4-piece Viridescent Venerer set on Kazuha. For the specific artifact stats you want, there are actually quite a few different ways to build him, which makes him more accessible and easier to build. As a pure damage amplifier, when you want to focus on this passive, buffing your team's elemental damage, and even increasing your swirl damage with elemental mastery, that is what you want to stack. So on every single piece, your sands, your goblet, and your circlet, you're just going to run elemental mastery. Keep in mind, Kazuha is a solo Anemo unit. If he's the only Anemo support in your team, he can have some energy recharge problems, so you can look for energy recharge on your substats on your elemental mastery pieces, but it shouldn't really be your main priority. go for elemental mastery on everything as your number one priority, and energy recharge can be a nice substat as well. Now, as a burst support, a damage dealer in like a Quickswap team or whatever other team you want to make, you can focus on Kazuha's damage. Now, something to keep in mind is that his highest potential damage, the most damage you can deal on Kazuha, even in a burst support team, is still running full elemental mastery on everything. However, there are a few conditions to that, mainly that you have to swirl multiple enemies, so at least 2, and get the double swirl on everyone, which means it's only good against multiple enemies if you can clump them up, notably with another Nemo character like Venti or Sucrose. So if you are doing that, you can stack elemental mastery still for very high damage. However, this can depend on substats, what you're fighting, and once again, if you're running another Anemo character to clump enemies. So just to simplify it, elemental mastery on everything can be the highest damage if you're double swirling every enemies, swirling more than 2 at once. For single target content, or to be more consistent like against every enemy as a whole, or if you just have better substats, you can go for other pieces like attack percent on the sands, Anemo damage on the goblet, and crit rate or damage on the circlet. However, running elemental mastery on everything is what I recommend because it is more damage if you can swirl more than one enemy, and it also buffs your team even more. In this build, the substats you're looking for are crit, rate, damage, elemental mastery as well, and energy recharge can be nice too, depending on your team comp. Personally, in my Quickswap team with 2 Anemo characters, I run about 130 energy recharge, and with an optimal rotation, I manage to get my burst up every time. For Kazuha's weapons, you'll be pleased to know that he's very free-to-play friendly. First of all, on an EM build, the new sword, Freedom Sworn, is technically the best, but I don't think it's worth pulling for. So unless you have that, I recommend going for the Iron Sting, which is a free-to-play option that's very good. It gives you a lot of elemental mastery, enabling your Kazuha to give your team more elemental damage. Also, something worth mentioning, in a team comp where you're sort of starved on elemental particles, so a team where Kazuha is your only Anemo character, and he is stacking elemental mastery on his artifacts, energy recharge swords are actually viable, and Sacrificial Sword is a very good option. Especially with High Refinement, this not only solves your energy problems with the high energy recharge stat, but it also lets you use your elemental skill twice, allowing you to E before and after your burst, giving you more particles and dealing more damage. So while I recommend Iron Sting overall in this build for the elemental mastery, I think Sacrificial Sword is also a great option. Now, on the other hand, for a Quickswap style team where your Kazuha is trying to do as much damage as he can in one rotation, and you're maybe running him with another Anemo character to generate particles, Iron Sting is actually still really good because we've established that elemental mastery on Kazuha is basically always good. That being said, there are more options in this type of build. Basically, every 5-star is great, like the Jade Cutter, which is an amazing stat stick, and Summit Shaper for the same reason. Also, Lion's Roar can be good if you're infusing your swirls with Pyro or Electro for the damage bonus that it gives. And so this build has many more options, and an excellent free-to-play one with the Iron Sting, increasing your elemental mastery and your swirl damage. So currently I am C0 because I'm resisting my urge to become a Leviathan, but he does have some really good constellations. Now, before we get into them, I do want to say that he is great at C0, and I don't believe you need to pull for constellations to make him good, and that C0 is definitely enough. But with that being said, his Constellation 1 and 2 are both very strong. His C1 decreases the cooldown of your E by 10%, and then when you use your burst, it resets your E, your skill. This means that you gain uptime on your elemental skill, and you effectively get more particles to help any energy recharge problems that you could have been having. His Constellation 2 is also very good because the Whirlwind created by your burst increases the elemental mastery of your Kazuha by 200, but also of any character in the field by 200. So this is just really good, not only for Kazuha, but for your whole team, making your reactions much stronger and making your Kazuha's Ascension 4 passive even stronger if you do utilize this bonus EM. Your Constellation 3 and 5 are both just damage. Constellation 4 gives you some energy when you're at a low energy amount, and your Constellation 6 enables main DPS Kazuha. This can be a very interesting one because it enables a completely different playstyle that actually seems pretty good, but it isn't something that I've tested because it is very expensive. So overall, his Constellation 1 and 2 are the two most appealing ones for me, and they both seem quite powerful, but C0 is more than enough. Now let's talk about a very important section, Kazuha's team comps. So as I mentioned multiple times throughout the video, and as you guys know, there are multiple different ways to play Kazuha. First of all, as an elemental mastery support, when you're just using him to buff the elemental damage of your team and maybe get some good swirl damage in, he fits a lot of team comps that want that elemental damage bonus. So for example, in a Kaching carry comp, if you're running her Electro, having Kazuha to swirl Electro and not only proc the Verdescent Venerer set, but also give your Kaching this elemental damage bonus, he can be like the best option in that, and a very powerful Anemo support. This works with a lot of different elemental carries too. I believe he can work very well in a Diluc comp, once again for the same reasons, giving you that elemental damage bonus and reducing the resistance if you do swirl that Pyro. On top of that, he can also replace Sucrose in a team like like this one, the Child Shangling comp, in case you are using Sucrose and like your other team. Compared to other Anemo units, against multiple enemies, he's worse at clumping than Venti, but he's usually preferred in those situations over someone like Sucrose because he can clump pretty efficiently with his E and deal a lot of damage with his abilities. And just in general, he's pretty good in teams with elemental carries because of the elemental damage bonus he provides to everyone, and obviously being able to utilize the Verdescent Venerer set. That being said, my personal favorite way to play Kazuha is in a Quickswap team. This team comp right here is one of the most powerful ones we could find, and what I'm going to be using in the DPS showcase for the most part, because every character here plays a very significant role and enables the others to deal more damage. So first of all, before I get into some example team comps, let's talk about characters that synergize well with Kazuha. So generally speaking, in a Quickswap team, I like to run with another Anemo character who can generate particles for him and give you that Anemo resonance. On top of that, other Anemo characters like Venti and Jean just have good scalings on their abilities, which is great for Quickswap teams. That being said, even characters like Sucrose on very low investment can just act as a clumper, someone to group enemies and generate particles for your Kazuha, which can oftentimes be good enough. On top of that, since Kazuha's burst snapshots, as we mentioned earlier, a character like Bennett is very, very good with him. He'll apply Pyro, allowing you to constantly swirl Pyro with your Kazuha and snapshot all of your team's bursts. In a comp like this, Bennett is essential because he lets your Shangling, Venti, and Kazuha snapshot and increases their damage significantly. And if you guys don't know how Quickswap teams work, I made a video on it, literally my last video on this channel, but basically you're spamming your skill and your burst on every character, rotating between them. Now, there are so many different Quickswap teams you can run. For example, this triple Anemo team with Bennett to apply Pyro, and there's a lot of things you can do like swirling Electro to buff characters like Fischl, or even freeze teams that I've seen with Kaya. Lastly, I want to mention, in case anyone's wondering, with Shao, yes, he can act as an Anemo support, right? Generate some Anemo particles for your Shao, but he doesn't really offer too much else other than just a decent amount of damage, to where I still recommend characters like Venti or Sucrose with a Thrilling Tales over Kazuha in a Shao team. And also, I feel like I have to mention that Thundering Fury Kazuha in a team like this can work by constantly spamming Electro Charge, but it's not something that I personally play. And if there's any information, especially regarding team comps that I'd like to add, once again, it will be in a pinned comment because I am always afraid to miss anything on a new character. That being said, we're now going to do a DPS showcase by doing a full Abyss 12 clear and also including some clips from the Abyss 11 and from just some random enemies. My Kazuha has two different builds that I'm going to be using, either a full Elemental Mastery build or one where I'm running Attack on the Sands, Anemo Damage Goblet, and Crit on the Circlet. Keep in mind for this showcase, my talents are 668 because I'm now on my NA account, and I am Constellation 0. With that being said, I hope you enjoy the guide, and I hope you'll enjoy the showcase. So overall, I love Kazuha. He's one of the most fun support characters I've ever played and is excellent in quickswap teams and can also be very good to enable your team by giving your carries that elemental damage. I really love Kazuha. He's a pretty perfect character in my opinion, well balanced and very fun / smooth to play. But as I said throughout this video, I only believe you should get him if you like him. I try to cover everything you need to know about Kazuha in one concise video, and if there's anything I want to add, as always, it will be in the pinned comment down below. So yeah, not much else to say. Kazuha is pretty amazing. I hope this guide helped you. If you have any feedback or questions, leave it in the comments down below. I read most of them. And as always, if you enjoyed it, feel free to sub and follow me on Twitch. And with that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.